Hey guys, Noah with Stage 3 Motorsports, and we're here today in the shop with our 2018 F150. We're going to be swapping out the suspension, throwing in some new Rancho Quicklift Struts. But first, make sure you guys head down below, hit subscribe, and also follow us on Instagram to keep up with everything we got going on. So right now on our truck, we just have the factory strut assembly, regular strut, coil, all that, with a spacer on top of it, and that does give us a little bit more lift, but that's not necessarily ideal for off-roading, and it's not going to give us any better valving or ride quality in rough terrain or on washboards or gravel or whatever it may be. So by taking these new Rancho Quicklifts, we're going to be able to swap out this whole unit, get something that's a little bit more off-road ready, while still also being able to add a bit of lift in the front of the truck and keep that leveled stance.
First up on our install is to remove our wheels for access to the front suspension. We also have these spacers to remove since we're going to do a different wheel setup and we don't need them going forward. Our axle dust cap can also be removed, followed by the axle nut. Along the side of the knuckle and on the frame by the control arm, you'll see all of the brake and vacuum line connections that can be unbolted to allow for maximum wiggle room when we unbolt the knuckle itself. Next, we can work on removing the outer tie rod from the knuckle. You might need to break it loose with a few hits from a hammer. At the upper control arm, loosen the nut that holds the control arm from the knuckle, but leave it loosely attached for the time being. And now at the upper control arm frame connections, loosen the frame bolts just a turn or two to take the tension off of the UCA, which will make it easier to remove from the knuckle later. The sway bar can also be removed from the end link to allow the suspension to fully droop. Underneath the lower control arm, remove the two bolts that hold in the lower coilover mount, then we can move up top and remove the three nuts holding in the coilover at the top shock mount. Back at the upper control arm and knuckle, we can now fully remove the nut connecting the two in order to swing the control arm and knuckle out of the way. A pry bar will now come in handy to remove the stock coilover from the shock tower. Ours was a bit more difficult to remove due to the strut spacer we had previously installed. Set the new Rancho replacement in the lower control arm first and feed the new bolts through the bottom with a nut threaded on loosely. Then you can push the coilover and lower control arm down to squeeze the coilover into the top hat of the strut tower. Loosely attach the top three nuts to hold it in place for now. Bring the axle back into the knuckle and make sure it seats properly. With the knuckle ready to go, bring down the upper control arm and connect it to the knuckle. We can now completely tighten the top three strut bolts, followed by the vacuum and brake lines, back into their brackets. Tighten back down the upper control arms to the frame of the truck to bring back the required tension to the control arm, then torque down the bolt at the upper control arm and knuckle. Reattach the vacuum line to the hub, then tighten the sway bar back to the end link. All of the brake line brackets can be replaced to the knuckle and frame at this point, then the axle nut and its dust cover. Only use a 1/4 inch ratchet to tighten this nut to avoid over torquing it. Both lower strut bolts can be tightened to the lower control arm, followed by the outer tie rod being replaced in the knuckle and bolted in. And with that, our install is finished after replacing our new wheels and tires.
The Rancho Quicklift Struts have been a bit of a hot topic around the shop because we've kind of heard everything from 1-star reviews to 5 stars, with some people having them break with pretty light use and other people using them a little bit more extreme and been really pleased with how they operate. So it can be sort of up in the air, but if you guys have had these on your truck, make sure you leave a comment below and let us know what you thought or how you like the way they perform. Now, in terms of talking on-road performance, we actually just spent about 200 miles in the seat with this truck, driving it outside of Phoenix, doing some road trip stuff, doing time in the parking lots, working it around neighborhoods, all the standard stuff that you do with daily driving. And the Rancho Quicklifts ride pretty nice. Obviously, with a strut like this, you're not going to get the same performance that you'd get from a factory strut, in the sense that these aren't going to be quite as soft. You'll notice it's a little bit stiffer on the road and you feel the bumps a little more, but what you're gaining is obviously the 2.5 inches of lift on the front to level it out, and the adjustability and being able to tweak it and use it more off-road. With our experience, they are pretty comfortable, and a setup like this Quicklift coilover is going to be a bit better than using just your standard spacer kit on top of a factory strut, and a little bit safer if you're really wanting to take this truck off-road and beat it a bit. But generally, road tripping it and daily use is going to be just fine for most people. So after spending some time behind the wheel, running this thing around on some forest roads and rocky terrain outside of Williams, overall the ride off-road is pretty comfortable with the Rancho Quicklifts, but they are going to be a bit stiffer than the factory suspension if that's what you're used to. That being said, with any sort of leveling strut or spacer that you put in there where you're putting the front end up in the air a bit higher, you're going to get a bit stiffer ride, and there's not really any way around that. So for what it is, the Rancho is pretty accommodating in how it feels off-road. It's worth saying too that running a coilover like the Ranchos or a leveled strut is a little bit more confidence inspiring off-road because it's designed for that terrain, more so than just putting a spacer on your factory suspension. Those are typically only designed to give you a little bit more room for a tire and to just give you a better look overall, but they're not going to handle the terrain quite the same. The Ranchos obviously still aren't designed to compete with things like a Fox 2.5 coilover or a Icon with resis on it. Those are obviously a lot more off-road focused, are going to take more abuse, but the Ranchos will get you off-road and get you a little more comfortable so you can back to the camping spaces or different lakes where you like to fish. It basically just gets you outside and makes the truck a little more capable overall. I did also have a chance to sort of tweak the suspension settings with the little red dial that comes on these Ranchos just to feel it out and see if I could get a difference in the ride. I will say that it didn't feel like anything super dramatic happened when I turned the dial, even if I maxed it out one way or the other, but you could maybe get it a little bit softer and feel a slight difference depending what terrain you're running on. But for the most part, the Ranchos are going to ride the same on pretty much any terrain. If you like the look and stance on this truck and you want to pick up a set of Rancho Quicklifts for your F-150, we'll have some links down below that you can check out. And they do make them for a wide range of generations, so not just an 18. If you have back to an 09, there'll be something available for you and you can get something that'll fit properly with your build.